So during the Q&A session, we'll alternate which candidate starts answering the question. So our first question will start with Teresa. What actions have you taken or changes have you made in the last 2 to 3 years that will make you a better representative for Georgia? And again, we're working with 3 minutes.
All right, thank you. Well, as I said, I had the privilege of being mayor of Columbus, Georgia, and in doing so, we actually reformed our budget, something we so desperately need to do at the federal level. It was a $275 million budget. We had a pension, a public pension that was failing. It was 74% funded when I came in. We were able to maintain the defined benefit plan, and we were able to reform it so that it was over 96% funded when I left. It took a lot of political capital, clearly, to do that. It was extremely controversial, but we saved the taxpayers $55 million because we were able to completely restructure it in a way that made it so much more efficient for the people it was to serve. And so I tell you that as just one example from reforming our budget, to also working with our police department and calling upon the resources that were then available with the Justice Department to benefit police departments like we had in Columbus, Georgia. To engage people through transparency, as is not being done now by David Perdue, through Let's Talk with the Mayor forums, some 30 of them, and debates, which we had 44 debates of. So transparency, making dysfunctional systems work, utilizing your leadership potential to work for the people and make government work for the people are all things that I have learned that will certainly benefit the state of Georgia and the citizens of the United States as I take those skills to the United States Senate. And I will close by saying one of the things in the last 2 or 3 years, it was limited by time, that I had such a privilege to be involved in was the saving of Sweetbriar College, which also benefited women's colleges such as Agnes Scott, Spelman, Wesleyan, and Macon. We were able to raise $28.5 million in 110 days, and I was able to be named the chair of Sweetbriar College. We reformed the curriculum, again reformed the budget from a revenue standpoint and an expenditure standpoint to make it a viable entity. And so I think that the moral of that story for you all, of that body of work, is that we all have skills. We all have something that we can do, and mine happens to be reforming dysfunctional systems. And that's something that the United States Senate is in desperate need of. So thank you.
We're being tested under pressure. I'll start off by saying that I mentioned earlier about the decriminalization of marijuana. It actually was 3 years ago, back in August, that Clarkston, on one city council night, passed a decriminalization of marijuana, election day as a holiday, and a $15 minimum wage as for city employees. To this day, no other city has adopted a $15 minimum wage for their city employees, which I think is unfortunate because that is the living wage to live in Metro Atlanta. Okay. One other city has passed election day as a holiday, city of South Fulton. And we need all governments, especially if they're Democratic run, election day as a holiday. It's very simple. Here's a simple solution. Change out Columbus Day. All right, that's a sorry excuse for a holiday. Make election day as a holiday. I am proud that the leadership we showed in Clarkston on decriminalization of marijuana has actually spread. 13 other cities have passed similar ordinances. From the city of Atlanta, South Fulton, Chamblee, Macon, Augusta, Savannah, Statesboro, even the small town of Ludowici, Georgia, which at one point was known as the last American speed trap. It's way down in South Georgia. Even they passed this criminal justice reform measure to make small amounts of marijuana possession a ticket-only offense, not a misdemeanor, no jail time, no ruining your life, having to report in future job applications that you have a criminal record. It's something that is disproportionately affects people of color, low income, and it is a life-altering experience. The war on drugs has failed, and we can only do so much at the local level, and so taking that experience and, quite frankly, listening to, it wasn't necessarily just the young people who were asking for this decriminalization of marijuana, it was the grandmas who were tired of seeing their sons and their grandsons caught up in this system. And one of the things that I'll fight for in the U.S. Senate is ending the war on drugs, making drug addiction a public health issue, something that we should be proactive on, not punitive. It needs to be rehabilitative. We need to do expungements. We need to create a legalized system for recreational or medical, and we need to do restitution. Those are things that I'll lead on. The last thing I'll say in the last 30 seconds, I think you said 30 seconds. No.
You still have 40 seconds.
Oh, 40 seconds. I've actually won 2 statewide elections, interestingly enough. 5 years ago, I was elected as the vice chair for candidate recruitment of the State Democratic Committee. I've led the candidate recruitment efforts the last 4 years. The number one goal was to help county committees create recruitment committees. So there's always people in our counties thinking about the next election. I've done hundreds of trained hundreds of candidates, and I was elected earlier in this year as the first vice chair of the State Democratic Party. And the skills that I learned from that is that Georgia's a very big, diverse state. It means a lot more listening and less talking, and that's the kind of things I want to bring to the Senate. Thank you.
Well, the first thing I would start with, and I mentioned it earlier, but I have run statewide and got 1.8 million votes on a scrappy budget of $1.6 million. We not only brought out hundreds of thousands of new voters last year, led by the efforts largely of Stacey Abrams, but I think all of us on the ticket also contributed to that. We tripled the Latinx vote. We tripled Asian American Pacific Islander vote. We doubled the youth vote. So we brought a lot of new people to the ballot box, not because we pandered to the moderates, not because we pandered to Republicans we thought were persuadable, but because we championed our values. The simple idea that nobody should be sick because they're poor and nobody should be poor because they're sick. Thank you. We championed the idea that 64 counties without a pediatrician and 79 counties without an OBGYN and the highest maternal mortality rate in the nation is unacceptable in 2019 Georgia. That is what we did. That's how we drive turnout, and we can do it again in 2020. On the professional side, guys, some of you know my story. But in 2008, my family bought a struggling trucking company right at the beginning of the Great Recession. We had 100 employees, and most people thought probably 2 months to live. They assumed we would go under, but instead, we invested in our people. We didn't just talk about the kind of progressive ideals and policies that politicians talk about. We did it. We strengthened and defended our union at every turn. We invested in our people, and as healthcare costs rose dramatically in this country, while every other employer was passing those costs on to their people, we decided to pay 100% of every employee's premium for them and their family. We implemented paid paternity and maternity leave for birth parents, adoptive parents, foster parents, men and women, gay and straight. If you have a new child in your family, we give you paid leave. Washington couldn't figure it out, but we sure did. And we couldn't get young families, young female executives into our office at the rate we wanted. So we put an on-site daycare in our Kennesaw headquarters, and we diversified the number of women and minorities working in our office. And then we ran into a trade war and a pension crisis this year, guys. We had the jaws of that trade war all over our trucking company. But rather than run from my responsibilities, as of last Friday, so just less than a week ago, we finalized a restructuring that saved all 3,000 jobs without a single wage cut, without a single health care, saving thousands and thousands of pensions in the process. That's the conversation we're going to have in 2020. Thanks so much.
So updating y'all on the last 2 or 3 years, I'll just start briefly on a personal note, which is Alicia and I got married about 13 months ago down in Coweta County. She has finished medical school. She's now an OBGYN doctor at Emory. She's working a lot of labor and delivery at Grady and at Planned Parenthood. On the professional side, in the last 3 years, for dozens of television broadcasters in dozens of countries around the world, for an audience globally of hundreds of millions of people, my company has produced investigations of war crimes committed by international peacekeepers, high-level corruption in international sports, death squads targeting children in northern Malawi, crooked police, all over the world. This is the work that I do. Because when people abuse their power, when people steal from the public purse, it offends our basic values of justice, and it hurts the most vulnerable people. And what's happening in this country right now, and the reason that we have right-wing extremism and right-wing nationalism resurgent not just here, but around the world, the reason that we have such a loss of faith in democracy around the world is that corruption, political corruption, the influence of money over those who represent us in Congress has become intolerable, and it is destroying our political system. When 90% of Americans support universal background checks to purchase a firearm, and Congress does nothing because it's bought by the NRA, that is corruption. When Americans and Georgians are rationing insulin, unable to afford the outrageous prices of prescription drugs, and Congress does nothing because of the financial power of the pharmaceutical industry, that is corruption. When David Perdue and Donald Trump and their allies try to throw millions of people with pre-existing conditions off of their health insurance because they are bought and paid for by the health insurance industry, that is corruption. I have a proven track record investigating and exposing corruption, war crimes, and the abuse of power all around the world. That is what I do for a living. That is what I will do in Washington.